This time on Poll Hub, we're checking in on the pandemic. There are new polls nearly every day, gauging the way Americans are dealing with it, and we're looking at some of the most interesting findings right now. Also, the presidential election is less than 6 months away, really, and polls in critical states are becoming slightly more frequent. But are they any good? Oh, you know we've got something to say about that one, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
Obviously, pollsters have been busy for the last few weeks especially, but really the last couple of months, not talking about the election, which we would normally do, but really talking about talking to Americans, finding out what Americans are thinking and how they're dealing with this pandemic. What is new in the polls that you've seen over the last 7 to 10 days? What are we seeing that's new, that's different? What's capturing your attention?
Well, I think something that's really interesting is although the numbers, the actual numbers of hospitalizations, people who are in the ICU, people who have died, has fluctuated from state to state, and in some states has been increasing, in earlier states that had the onset stabilized and even decreasing. One of the trends that we seem to be seeing is that Americans overall are kind of feeling, I don't know if it's cabin fever, but they're feeling much more lax in terms of following some of the social distancing guidelines. There was a Gallup poll which was conducted just kind of the past week and the last week, and found that people are less likely right now to be avoiding small gatherings. I mean, they're not racing out, to have, big events, but certainly they're more likely to be connecting with neighbors and other family members. In fact, we see a decline of about 10 points. At the end of March, 84% of Americans said that they had avoided small gatherings. And in this last poll, it was 74% of Americans. And it seems somewhat interesting just because it's not quite the connection between the actual numbers of what is happening and perhaps some of the warnings of the experts. But we certainly in the Northeast, we can understand it as we feel that spring is right around the corner and the weather has gotten better. And I think people have a sense that they can get out and about a bit more.
But I think there's a big difference in these numbers also between whether people feel they can control their environment when they're going out. So if you're saying you're going to visit family and friends, you can sort of talk to them, is everybody okay? What's been going on? And then you just go from maybe one place to another in your car, presumably, and you could do that. So people are saying, yeah, sure, I'll do that, maybe more than I have, but I'm not really ready to go back to work. I'm not getting a sense of normalcy until, conditions are met. And when I do go out in public, people are telling us and telling different pollsters, they want to be wearing masks and they want to be kind of like being careful. So I think there is cabin fever. I think it's been going on a long time. I think people are certainly in the Northeast are happy that the numbers have gotten better, and we're kind of like on the cusp of reopening things. But people are still being very comfortable, and I think people are really
cautious.
And they're really not, comfortable returning to their normal routines, especially. Republicans are saying I'm more comfortable than Democrats. I find it funny in this, and you guys can weigh in. I mean, this is a virus, and we're still getting a party spread. This is not tax and spend policies. This is people getting sick from a virus, and we're seeing whether this is a threat to our health. Democrats are almost twice as likely than Republicans to say it is a threat to your health, even though they share the same view on the economy. And on this, are you comfortable returning to your routine? Well, Republicans overwhelmingly say sure, and Democrats say no. I know the partisan divide is wide, and the White House has been sending out different signals, and governors are saying different things. But gosh, is there anything that, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west? Okay, so, do we have a Democratic or Republican difference on that? I don't know.
Probably. We should ask that question. Probably. One of the things that strikes me is that I think there's two different things happening at the same time that may not necessarily make sense at first blush. And one is that people that the polls, numerous polls are showing that people are saying they're feeling more comfortable to get out, to do things. Some of them even, not necessarily go back to work, but to go to restaurants and things like that. And at the same time, there's numerous polls, including this Gallup panel, that when you ask about, well, so what does it take for you to resume some normal activities? There's pretty widespread acceptance of some pretty tough measures that need to be taken. In this Gallup panel, for instance, at the very bottom, mandatory temperature checks for entering a public building. Only 27% thought that was very important. But on the other side of that, mandatory quarantine for anybody testing positive is 80%. I think what we have is that cabin fever that's kicking in, and people in many areas of the country seeing a fairly small impact. Now, yeah, we're in the Northeast, but I'm 2 hours north of New York City in a county that has more deer than people. And there are people who have gotten it. There are deaths in this county. There are hospitalizations in this county. This county is still subject to Governor Andrew Cuomo's measures to keep us, working from home and not mingling. On the other hand, when the guy comes by to do some work on the yard here, or I see somebody in the market when I go into town, this is not New York City. This is not people knowing somebody right around the corner who's had it, or knowing somebody that has died. And I think that is part of what's driving this. In that other parts of the country, there is a lot less personal contact with this. And while people are concerned, there is less reason that's right up in their face for them to be concerned and to show concern.
Also, I think among family members, I think people also know whether friends and family have been out and about, or whether they've been, sheltering at home. And this whole idea that the 14-day quarantine, if people have been at home for that amount of time and no one in the family has shown symptoms, even though we're all connected, we are much less so, or have been in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And so there's probably some sort of a little bit of a comfort factor there as well. But to your point, Jay, I mean, people really, don't want to get things moving until they have some assurances that there are therapies to treat COVID-19, that there's likely to be, a vaccine kind of coming around the corner, and also that the healthcare community, in their locales are able to deal with any kind of influx that may occur, or any kind of secondary wave that may happen.
One of those numbers, part of that I think is so interesting. You just alluded to it. Is the what we were talking about in that Gallup panel? Widespread testing to identify and monitor coronavirus infections. That has 82% saying somewhat or very important. I mean, that's a huge majority. And that's something that we haven't reached that point. We're not there. And if people are still saying that at this point, despite the cabin fever, I do think that accounts for why there is kind of what appears to be this disconnect. When you ask one question, yeah, I'm going to go see family. When you ask another question, you're going to go to work. No way. That's why you get what seems to be this discordant,
And then looking forward, what happens if, there is some opening up as it's occurring, and then we see a spike in the numbers again, a return? I think people are very worried about that. And the notion that we may be opening too fast, despite what's happening in the policy realm, public opinion is not as eager to move in that direction. So that's one thing I find interesting. Two other things in the numbers. First of all, these protests that have been about, do we, to protest to open up things quicker, and we've seen those at the various state capitals. Most people don't like these protests. They've been opposing them in these polls. Republicans less disliking than the Democrats, but
Still strong
people are not.
majorities. Yeah, still strong majorities.
And the other thing, and the last thing I saw in these numbers, that vaccine, are you going to get vaccinated? And I'm just saying, here we go again. I mean, there's one thing to say you're going to wear a mask. There's another thing, if we get a vaccine, what are you going to do? What are people going to do? And we're seeing about maybe 20%, 1 in 5 saying, I don't think so. And, what does that do for the society and people's reaction and things like that?
Well, it was interesting. There was a poll out last week that asked the question about whether people would be vaccinated if there was a vaccine that was tested and effective. And I remember, looking at that question wording and thinking, at that point, I think it was 74% of people said that they would agree to be vaccinated under those conditions. But the likelihood of us knowing whether a vaccine has been well tested and effective, particularly initially, is very slight. So Yahoo News and YouGov actually asked the question again and just asked it more straightforward about whether Americans would get vaccinated if there was a vaccine. And only 55% of Americans said that they would get vaccinated. And now only 1 in 5 said that they are not getting vaccinated, said straight out they wouldn't do it. But I thought it was very interesting that 1/4 of Americans were really on the fence about that. So that has, again, pretty significant public health implications as we continue down this road. People are hopeful that we'll get past this wave and be able to manage the next, given that there is that expectation that something may happen, so that we will be better prepared. But boy, that's a really scary kind of number.
As people say in Twitter, I'm old enough to remember when the polio vaccine came into existence and how
You are?
parents. Oh yeah, oh
Okay.
yeah. I remember early on, and the notion of a live vaccine, and you were going to put a live into polio into your system. Well, that was scary. And look, if anything, we know from the last 2 months, this has been uncharted territory. It's been uncertain. It's been very anxiety provoking. So people are really going to be very cautious about a lot of things. I myself am looking forward to the vaccine. I think it's a big answer to getting us back on the road to normalcy.
And will you get vaccinated, Lee?
Oh, I'll wait about a month and then I definitely will.
I think the vaccine thing, though, is interesting in this case, Lee, because, well, yeah, there's historical precedent for being concerned about that. The idea of live vaccines, like the H1N1 vaccine came along. I don't remember any debate about that or any significant debate. We're in a little bit of a different world than we were at that point in terms of the spread of conspiracy theories and the anti-vaxxer movement, as it's called, which are people who are opposed to vaccinating their children because they believe,
Or
even though scientific evidence,
or themselves, yeah.
Yeah, or themselves, but even though all the scientific evidence indicates that this is not the case, they believe that having those vaccines can lead to autism and other kinds of things. That this has this level, 20% saying I'm not getting a vaccine, I don't think is just the same type of concern as back in the days of the polio vaccine. I do think that this has to do with the level of conspiracies becoming more accepted, people believing more of them, it concerning more people. And the 20%, I think, it would be interesting for the next round of questions about this to ask a preliminary or maybe a question after about vaccinating your kids and vaccines in general, to see how much alignment there is between people who are anti-vaccination in general and people who are saying, I'm not getting the vaccine, even if it comes, I'd rather get coronavirus than get a vaccine.
Okay, so now let's turn our direction over to a discussion of politics in the election. We're seeing polls on that as well, starting to sprinkle across the landscape with Biden and Trump and key swing states and the like. And there was a poll that caught our attention this week, several polls, several things. But the one that was done by Marist College, I think in Texas, did a poll of Texas, or from Massachusetts, I believe. But they did a poll of Texas, and Nate Cohn of the New York Times, not loving some of their stuff, In fact, he went on a little bit of a Twitter rampage there. Although up against President Trump, everything seems rather tame when you go tweeting away. But he's basically saying, folks, I got problems with this. These polls aren't, worth your time to start commenting on them about. If you take some of the previous numbers and you just weighted up to Texas +9, which is what Trump got last time, you can get these numbers just from his Twitter followers,
so
which
Lee,
is hardly representative.
Here's what he said specifically. Folks, a majority of the respondents to this Emerson poll of Texas were reached on M-Turk, which I'll tell you what that is in a minute. Let's not fill up my Twitter feed with further discussion of it. Of course, the Twitter feed was filled up with further discussion of it, and Nate said a couple more things. Let's suppose right now I polled my Twitter feed on this 2020 vote preference, 2016 recalled vote, and some demographics. Let's say I then it to, there's a misprint there, but let's say I then it to 16, compared to 16 results in Texas demographics. I don't really believe that's fundamentally much different from the Emerson poll. This M-Turk is Mechanical Turk. It's an Amazon product of people who, M-Turk, the Amazon Turk has generally been used when you wanted to hire people for piecework on a digital project. So for instance, if I wanted to transcribe 1,000 interviews, I would go to Mechanical Turk and I'd find people that would, for 5 cents a transcript or 20 cents or $1 a transcript, bid on translating this or on transcribing these interviews. To use that in polling, Nate Cohn is arguing, is as a sample, is disqualifying.
Yeah,
and Barb, I'm going to guess you're going to say that's probably correct.
Well, of course. Statistically, I'm going to, sort of, let me put it this way. There's been a lot of creative ways to try to measure public opinion. And Emerson College, I believe it's a group of students that put this together with faculty advisement. And Mechanical Turk, you're absolutely right on. It's kind of also a crowdsourcing, platform for market researchers. It's probably, a decade and a half old. And it has been used for some academic research, much to my disappointment, because it isn't representative in the least. It is global in the sense you can get people from all around the world to sign up for this, to do piecework. A lot of marketers use it for recruiting people, for focus groups, because you can identify them. They've been vetted. The best way that Amazon has been doing this with algorithms, but they've been trying to minimize abuse. But this in no way is any kind of a random probability sample. So to suggest that you could drill down and get people in Texas on Mechanical Turk to answer and be representative of voters in statistical terms and colloquially is absolutely absurd.
Okay, well, I don't know if that was a statistical term. It certainly was colloquially clear. But look, to their credit, and I do think it's funny that Nate said this doesn't warrant further discussion, but we can find something about. Look, to their credit, they do provide a methodological discussion of what they did. There's no hidden ball trick here. We know what they did. There is transparency. But there's one other thing, and I'd like I think you probably would weigh in on this, Barb. They talk about using, and polls sometimes go back to a previous election for turnout and then try to adjust their sample based on the previous turnout. In this case, you'd go back to 2016. And I know they're doing some other things with new voters in this particular poll. But talk a little bit about why you don't like going back to necessarily find who voted last time and then sort of crank it into the current election.
Well, besides the fact that their sample itself, and what I can say kindly about it is that it's incomplete. It certainly has people who, reside in Texas, but it is not representative of all Texas voters. But the issue of looking backwards, and I mean, we've said this many, many times, is that the future is not as we remember it. And so when we look back to previous elections, we're making some very significant assumptions that we're going to have very similar turnout. We're going to have, and those people are going to have similar attitudes and perspectives on the candidates as they did previously. And we can take a whole slew of different Texas elections from 2016 to 2012 to 2008, and you can reweight it to a variety of different things. But even if you take those 3 elections, Texas vote was very different each time. And so the expectation is Texas of 2020 may be very different again from Texas of 2016. So you can't assume that because Donald Trump won Texas by 9 points over Hillary Clinton in 2016, that he is likely to do that against Joe Biden. He may win it by, twice that or half that, or not win it at all.
And we can't say who the likely voters are at this point. And we certainly wouldn't go back 4 years and try to model it based on that. And that's one of the things, people say, well, is it a likely voter? Is that who you're talking to? Well, voters have to sort of make up their minds whether they're going to vote or not before we start putting the tag on them, likely voter. That's something we're going to be hearing a lot of discussion about also, not from Emerson, but from the polling community generally, when we get closer to the election, about who is a likely voter or not, and how do you arrive at that conclusion. It's a big deal in politics.
And I think this underscores what we've said from maybe the very first podcast we've done, 146 of these ago, which is that you've got to look at the poll and the methodology before you start quoting it, before you start believing it, before you start figuring out that it's telling you something. There are a lot of state polls out there right now that are garbage, and they're getting a lot of attention, like somebody's up, somebody's down in these states, and you cannot tell that from some of these polls that are out there. There is no way that a journalist or that you as poll consumer should make that determination based on that. Dig in, take a look, peel back the onion, and find out what you're looking at before you start believing that poll result is going to tell you anything about the state of the race right now in that state.
And that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, although we are not at that location at the moment. We're all remote in different locations, in fact, as is Mary Griffith, our executive producer, and Casey Schaff, who's our remote editor. So we're all scattered, but we're put together to do these podcasts.
Thanks. Do a little bit of electronic magic. Thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University for providing us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. We do that often and find it very helpful. Trend data is one of the great things about polling data. And if you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. You can find us at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. That is the best way to ask us questions. We monitor there. And if you're a good, close listener, you know that we answer some, even from top fans, and you know who you are.
And if you do want to check out some of the statistics and the surveyees about what we chatted about, you can go to the Marist Poll Academy, which we've talked about many times, our online learning platform. It's free, so you can take a look there, and we are likely to be having a more recent case study up soon on polling and some of the things we talked about today. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app, wherever you listen to us. Positive reviews help us out, and they help others too find us. So while you're at it, if you haven't already subscribed, please do.
And as we say a lot of times at this point, be healthy during this week, and we want you to be back to listen to us next week.